Amen. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It is almost incomprehensible that a human being would, even with the influence of God in his heart, be able to do what Moses did at the age of 40 years old. It's contrary to everything that I have ever known about humans that I have ever dealt with, that you would refuse to go along in the status quo that you had been part of now for 40 years. And that's what we're going to look at. This sermon tonight, this study lesson will be, for lack of a better word, it's going to be a great deal different than my normal teaching process. I'm going to go through everything this man went through. You know where you'll be able to find the PDF text if you want to find it later and be able to save this and study it in more detail. But with that all said, I hope tonight that you will understand there's a reason why you're going through the things you're going through in your life. Trials do not take God by surprise. And if you're going through trials and difficulties, there's a reason why you're going through them. And folks, I know. I mean, I've been over and I said hi to my sis coming in just now, and she told me that she's going through another trial. It's just things that's going to happen. You're never going to escape these. And we're going to go through and see many aspects of that. Chances are you will never ever have to be tried the way Moses was. You will never have to say yes or no to being the possible heir of Pharaoh. You will probably never have to do that. I don't even know what that entailed. In all my studies, I've never really been able to confirm exactly what Moses was in line to receive. I don't know whether he would have been the next Pharaoh or not. I don't know that. You can't base the Bible and history upon watching the Ten Commandments. As enjoyable as that motion picture is, chances are the Pharaoh would have been under a certain dictation of the Egyptian government for his son to have been the next heir of the throne, I would have thought. But who knows? I'm going to look at one point this evening, and I'm going to be looking at this from the comprehensive commentary of William Gouge. Talk to you just a little bit about him. He was born in 1575, and he lived to 1653. And his commentary is about the same size of Strong or Young's Concordance. It's that large, about 12 to 1,300 pages on this. It's the most comprehensive commentary I've ever read. Almost everything I will be saying to you tonight, for all practical purposes, will be coming from this commentary, because I'm wanting to get across to you the importance of understanding trials, why you go through them. I mean, I'm tried right now. The size of this congregation tries me. It tries my patience. It tries my endurance as a pastor. Makes me wonder what in the name of God this is all about. I mean, everything comes in this day and time in which we live before God. And why is that? Folks, we may be very close, and we're going to have to stand before God. Even God's children are going to stand at the judgment seat of Christ and give an account. I mean, we're not going to, there's no chance of losing our soul, but there's going to be a rewards that we're going to lose. And this thing, serving God 25 or 30 years, and then all of a sudden think you can go on vacation when you're 50 or 60 and quit. And it seems like that's what's going on in Christianity. So, Pastor, remember your philosophy. Now I'm going to be preaching to people who aren't here. Is that what you said, Brother Leonard? No, you're preaching to folks. Oh, you folks are here. So let's go on and see what we can get from this tonight. The only point that I'm going to be considering is Christian faith makes it possible to look at this world properly. The world in which we live. We can only do that by Christian faith. It is not possible any other way. What we see in the life of Moses, his actions, what he did, occurred after he had reached a mature age. It's just talking just this now to this brother that may be going into the ministry himself, and he's at the age of 30, and that's the age of maturity. In the Jewish community, they reached maturity at the age of 30. 30 is a grand, and it's the finest year that a human being lives. I will never forget when I was 30 years old. I just began my ministry here. I came here in August, and I reached my 30th birthday in October. That was in 1972, a long time ago. Stephen makes it very clear in Acts chapter 7, verse 23, at this time Moses was 40 years old. 40 years old, and what's he going to do? He's going to leave the courts of the Egyptians and go God knows where. Be a stranger in a strange land. Leave all the luxuries that he had been accustomed to. He made this decision when he was very mature. Now, you know, brothers and sisters, there's something about human growth. There's two things that we achieve in human growth. First of all, if we're normal, when we reach maturity, we become very strong. Our stature becomes very strong. Man that's 30 years old, like Paul is here, probably it's the strongest he will ever be in his life. It's a time of physical maturity. But it's also a time when you reach maturity of understanding. It's greatly increased when you're between 30 and 40 years old if you're normal. So he was a strong man, and he was a man of great intellectual capacity. He had reached both of these states. The Bible records many people like this. Samuel, Josiah, Timothy. They were examples of greatness when they were young. Josiah became king of Israel when he was, 9, 10, or 11 years old or something like that. Just a child. One of those verses in God's Word that I paraphrase to a certain degree that I love so much. The Bible says there was no king before him or no king after him like him. He was the greatest king, and he started when he was a child. Now, folks, you know this is not in a human being to be able to do this. It was not in a human being to be able to do what Moses did. I'm getting to the point now in my life that if God doesn't take over and control an individual, it's not possible for an individual to do those things necessary to serve God. This kills me, what I'm going to tell you right now. Remaining a child in understanding and wisdom in your mature years is a shame for a mature Christian. That comes from chapter 5, verse 12. You can go back to chapter 5 in Hebrews, verse 12, and see that. You can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1, and see that. You ought to grow as a child of God. Now, I'm going to go through some things tonight that you ought to be expecting in your life. They're going to happen. They're going to occur. Do you think whatever it is that's knocked you down and left you face down in the mud, that you're the only person that's ever happened to in life? Folks, we've been here 6,000 years now. Everything you've gone through, everybody that's ever lived at one time or another has gone through it. And you've got to be prepared for it when it happens. Why is it today every one of God's children, for the most part, cannot deal with any trial anymore? Whatever happens, it knocks you off course. It's sick, it's sad for God's children to quit all the time, or at least to become neutralized for long periods of time. Here's what the Bible recorded about the trials of Moses. I thought about this. When he was born, that law came down from Pharaoh because we're being populated so fast. And they said, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to do something to stop this. And they said, well, let's start killing all the children, all the male children when they're born. Up to the age of 2, I think it was. Here this mother, maybe this came out while she was still carrying this child, and the fear that she must have gone through, knowing as soon as her child is delivered, and the handmaidens that delivered these children were to come and tell the authorities, another male child has been born. And chances are they did just what we think. They would walk right in your house and grab your child and take it outside and sever it with a sword. He faced death at birth. What could be worse than that? And was helpless, could do nothing about it. Exodus chapter 2, verse 3 forward is the historical account of that. This will all be available. I'm going to give references on this. Now, folks, if you're on Sermon Audio, you can go ahead and get this PDF, a file on it, and it'll be available for you. This is wonderful references. Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, he faced being cut off from the church because the way he was saved and the way he became part of the Egyptians, he would have been cut off from the church if he would have stayed with that. He would have turned his back on God. He would have turned his back on the Hebrews, on the Jewish people. He was trained in the idolatrous court of the Egyptians for 40 years. Now, I can't go into the history here and explain a great deal about it. I don't know a great deal about it my own self. But I know almost everything that related to them and their thing of God and their gods, it was idolatry. I don't really like referring to motion pictures, even religious motion pictures, but you remember how in that Ten Commandments, how that Pharaoh stood there before that black creature praying that somehow his child would come back alive. And I love the way that lady, that woman, she looked at him and said, hey, that thing's dead. That's a piece of stone. He's not going to hear you. I love that illustration I heard just recently where a preacher was talking about this one man. Said, I'm telling you, I've been coming to you idols and praying to you for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I'm not even going to dust you anymore until you start answering some of my prayers. I'm not going to dust you. Got to dust my God. I'm preaching, God willing, Sunday night on the next portion of the book of Jeremiah. The whole thing's going to be relating to these idols. Living as a prince, he saw his people live as slaves and endured it. Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. How must it have been? He knew who he was. 40 years. He lived as a king's son. Everywhere he went, what did he watch? He watched the Jewish people that he knew he was a Jew. He watched them suffer. How is it that you can be on God's side and close up the bowels of your compassion watching your own blood kin suffer like that? How was he able to endure that? It's the hardest thing on earth to have some wherewithal and God to bless you and see someone that your own child or your own relative going through something and you want to help them and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to help them. Brother Newt, see if you can help the brother there. Seeking the good of his people, they regarded him not. Exodus chapter 2, verse 14, and Acts chapter 7, verse 25 and 27. No matter what he tried to do to help, they did not regard him. We'll say a lot about that before this evening's over with. He was forced from his place, his family, and the people of God in order to save his life. Exodus chapter 2, verse 15. Had to flee Egypt, had to run. He served 40 years in a strange land. Exodus chapter 2, verse 22. Exodus chapter 4, verse 24, even God became infuriated with Moses. Even after going there, 40 years old, he left Egypt. 40 years old in Midian, he lived there in a strange land. Then on the way back, God was infuriated with him. Why? Because he had not fulfilled that covenant of circumcising his son. As a matter of fact, if you go read that, God was going to kill him. You got a big study on that. That means that a lot of theologians say a lot of different things. God could have been there in the form of the angel of God and just have a sword and draw a sword out and cut his head off. Other commentaries suggest maybe that the angel of the Lord would have been there and given some kind of a deadly disease to him. Why? Because he did not do that one simple thing. And folks, they were not under the law. The law is still in the future. The law had not been given. He had not gone to Mount Sinai yet. But this was a commandment God gave to the Jewish people, to Abraham. that their children will be circumcised. Simple little things that God tells us. Simple little things you have to do. Why do you think that I have spent my life telling you there are simple little things you have to do to grow in grace and stay in fellowship with God? God sent Moses back to a cruel king. I'm telling you, buddy, when he got back to this Pharaoh that had replaced the one that was there when he left, was a very cruel king. Exodus chapter 5, verse 21, his own family and people murmured against him. Now, I did an interesting reading on that today. I believe both Adam Clark and John Gill had very interesting comments about this. You can always expect, now I want you to listen to me just for a moment. You can always expect when you're trying to serve God that the messengers of the devil are going to murmur against you. But you don't expect your friends to murmur against you. But that's the day and time, I guess, in which we live, and I guess it's always been that way. I mean, He was there back to deliver them, and they murmured against Him. He delivered them, and they revolted against God. Exodus chapter 32, verse 1 forward. The whole nation revolted against God after being delivered. His family, his people would have stoned him to death. Exodus chapter 17, verse 4, they would have killed Moses. I mean, he was gone. He was free. God sent him back there to deliver them. Y'all know the story, everything he did. I mean, I know they went through trials and difficulties. He went in and told Pharaoh, said, let God's people go. Pharaoh said, no, I'm not letting anybody go. Not only that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to let them go out and keep up the same amount of bricks they've been making, but we're not going to provide straw for them. That's what that's going to be. That's how that's going to be. A bigger burden. I know sometimes you folks sit out here and you say, Pastor, why in the world are you such a negative preacher? I am not a negative preacher. I just tell it to you like it is. It's the way the harder, the more difficult you try to serve God, the more serious you become, the more the devil's going to fight you. And oftentimes in the process of doing that, God's own people will fight you. I have never seen as much jealousy as there is in God's house, in God's family. God's people can't stand it when someone starts doing something. You get busy serving God trying to do something, someone will be jealous. You'll find some old person that's not even turned their hand over for God for 30 years cannot stand for a young Christian to come in church and get serious doing something. Oh, who's this person think they are? There's some bad motive about what this person's doing. But I don't mind telling you, I appreciated the fact what Uncle Jake did this evening when he was talking about the parking outside. That's been my principle. You know, brother, right now, you can rest assured that everything you do in church, you're in someone else, you know. But if God's children can't get past stuff like that, I mean, look on your pew. Go out there and look at your parking lot. See if your name's out there. How many churches have you been in when you pull in, you see a parking sign there that says pastor? Do you think Sprigg, West Virginia is the only place in the United States of America where we can't make a sign that says pastor? You know why I've not done that? That's stupid. Someone pulls in where the pastor, you know what you got to do to pull in my place? You got to get here before I do. For one thing. Which is not the easiest thing in the world to do. How long have you been married to me? About 6 weeks. All kidding aside, sweetheart, we've been married since 1964. We've been here since 1972. Have I ever said anything to you about on the way home, someone pulling in my place to park? I would rather for God to take my vocal cords and tear them out of my throat than to be offended over stupid stuff. People stay offended over stupid stuff. No wonder that the church has become a battlefield. It's almost like terrorists sitting in our pews with us. That's what I was talking about last week. Man will sit and smile at you right in your face, and he's plotting in the back of his mind, how can I kill this person? Sitting in the house of God with you. It's sad. I had a conversation one time with Russell and Nora. They'd come up and sit at the house with me, and they were telling me about an incident that had gone on in their church down in Ohio. And they said what had happened there with a group of people and what they had done to this pastor. And said when they had done this, later on, almost all these people suffered great retribution from God for doing it. And here's what Nora said. It's a dangerous thing to do stuff like that. It is a dangerous thing. If you ever get in a setting where a pastor's a bad person, what you need to do is bond your hearts together in godly prayer. Not on the telephone. Just go to God in prayer and say, God, help this man. Square this man away or take him. But there's ways to do things. Not turn the church into a battlefield. Oh, here's a sad one. Numbers chapter 16, verse 1, the account about Korah. He came up to Moses and said, Moses, you know, buddy, you've been taking a lot on yourself. It's about time you start sharing some of the duties. Well, y'all know the story. I'm not going to preach on Korah tonight, but God opened up the earth, and Korah and his family and his friends went alive into hell. There's no doubt about that. Numbers chapter 16, verse 1. A sad account. Moses disobeyed the Lord because of Israel. Numbers chapter 20, verse 8. God told him what to do. He said, take your stick and go out there to that rock and speak to that rock and I'll give you water. And he went out there and struck that rock twice with that stick. God said, you didn't honor me the way I told you. Now, Moses, now you don't get to take the people into the promised land. What did he do? He took a stick and hit a rock twice. It's the same God, brothers and sisters. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Why is it in Christianity today we got some kind of idea we get by with all these things? I don't know. He spoke unadvisedly because of Israel, recorded in the 106th Psalm, verse 33. And he was prohibited from doing that one thing he wanted to do so bad, was to march over that Jordan River and take these people into the promised land. Numbers chapter 20, verse 12. Here's what William Goode said. Desi, can you listen to me, sweetheart? You're down here on this front row where you can hear. Well, you know, I loved, before I died, I'd love to see a family come in this church that's on this front row. I'd love to see a wife that wore a long dress, and I'd like to see them have daughters that wore long dresses and be in what we call the spit pit. That'd be precious, wouldn't it? Wonder why you have a front row in a church. Probably should have just been a wall there. Listen to this. William Gooch. By these and by other saints' trials, we learn about saints' trials on earth. Answerably, it becomes us to expect trials, to prepare for them, patiently to bear them, and to be comforted under them. They're going to come. You got any trials in your life, Carol? You had any, Brother Nuke? Got any trials back there, Eddie? We all have trials. Look at this man. He was educated. Moses was educated in Egypt. He was mighty in words and deeds. He was mighty in faith. He had great zeal for God. Exodus chapter 32, verse 32. He had great courage in God's cause. He hated idols. He despised idolatry. I believe that's the sin that plagues every generation that's ever been on this earth. I'm going to ask you something. What's your idol? What stands between you and God that keeps you miserable all the time? I begin to think television's an idol. I love that little preacher I listened to from down at Greenville, South Carolina. He says, you got to sit in your living room watching your television with the remote control in your hand, and just as soon as something comes up that doesn't supposed to be there, you need to hit it. Can you stand here in God's name being taken in a movie? How do we Christians tolerate that? You know, God said that's one thing. He said, I cannot hold you guiltless if you take my name in vain. And I'm telling you, when you listen to someone take God's name in vain, it registers in your brain, and your tongue almost says it the same time they're saying it. And that one-eyed monster's almost become an idol to us. And it takes up so much of our time. Are you guilty, Pastor? Oh, me. Yes, I am. He was meek, this man was. Moses was a meek man, Numbers 12:3. Exodus chapter 2, verse 12, he loved his brethren. He condemned the world. He was patient anytime he was wronged by man. Exodus chapter 14, verses 11 through 13. What did you say, Pastor? I said he was patient. What do you mean? I mean he had led the people right out to the Red Sea, and they still murmured on him and jumped on him. And he was patient with them. He said, just wait just a minute. Watch what God's able to do. You'd have thought that he would have got up and thrown his shepherd stick down and just like, God, please, let me get away from these people. Moses repelled against envy and ambition. Boy, what two ugly words that is. Numbers chapter 11, verse 29. Boy, this is a good one. Exodus chapter 18, verse 7. He had a high regard for his father-in-law. You know, did you ever sense that I had anything in my heart towards your daddy besides love? What is this? What is this when people get married today? You all of a sudden go into a marriage where you hate half of the people that's going to be related to your family. Do you understand when you have children that it's not just, and they get married and they have children, you understand their children, you're their grandparents, you understand that your wife or husband's mommy and daddy's involved in that too, and the grandparents are just as important to those grandchildren as you are. We live in a world today, just as soon as a person gets married, the philosophy is you're supposed to hate everybody on the other side of that family. I'm going to tell you right now, here's what you ought to think about. Listen to me just for a moment. You are whoever you are. Love yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Love your children. There's nothing wrong with that. But love who your children marry. That person that your child marries is the other half of your child. Two become one when they get married. You can't love your son and hate his wife. You hate half of your son. You can't love your daughter and hate her husband. You just can't do that. Moses loved his father-in-law, highly esteemed him, respected his wisdom, and took advice that his father-in-law gave to him. A good father-in-law is going to give a good son-in-law wise advice. And you ought to listen if it's wise advice. Moses was faithful. Numbers chapter 12, verse 7. He put himself out for the good of the people. Exodus chapter 28, verse 13. He cared for his posterity. Numbers chapter 27, verse 16 and 17. Now, I got two more points. Number one, faith will raise a man above ambition. Let me talk to you about ambition for a few moments. This is something that I have seen that has destroyed people ever since I became a Christian. I was talking to my son the other day, and I asked him point blank. He gave my wife a lovely gift while he was at home. And by the way, he gave his church a lovely gift. It's not on the board over here, but he certainly did. And I asked him, I said point blank, I said, Clinton, how can you afford to do this? He said, Dad, I hate people that's got money because money runs their life. That's all it does. It controls them totally. He says the most wicked people on earth are the people that cling to money and they can't never get enough money. I said, well, give me some more then. Let me just help you along. Let me make you perfect. No, I didn't say that. Ambition is a branch of the corruption of our nature. It's called in God's Word puffing up. You ever watch a bullfrog puff up just before it makes its noise? That's it, Uncle Jake. Its jaws all swelled out. Puff up. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18 and 19. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Colossians chapter 2, verse 18. Ambition has no bounds. There's nobody you won't walk over top of if you've got ambition. I don't care what's in your way. You will stomp through it like a mad bull to get your way. Why? Because you're ambitious. You don't care who you destroy. There's no bounds. There's no limits. You've got to be very careful about becoming too ambitious. You know, folks, there's people who will literally, in a workforce, knock a man out of his job, send him out of the workforce unemployed, who has a wife and has children and can't take care of his wife and children. And why will this person do this? Because this individual can climb up the ladder one more step. You know, Jake, I saw it when I was on the railroad. I did like that one-day kicking thing out there where I got to stay home and not get paid, and while you got paid and then come back to your job the next day. You got 6 days pay and I got 4 days pay. I always thought it was wrong. I had a wife. I had a little girl. I had responsibilities. And I could read, too. And I knew it was wrong to do it. The contract was wrong. Really, shouldn't have been able to do stuff like that. I never did like things like that. Why does ambition make people do things like that? Now, I've said all this to say this. I brought you up to this point in my sermon right now to preach to you for a few moments from my heart. There's no magical formula in dealing with your family. Never has been, never will be. If you expect a magical formula, it does not exist. Moses had the world in his hands. His grandfather was Pharaoh. He had everything. I want you to listen to this now as I talk to you from my heart just for a few moments. I believe his heart was torn between his love for Israel and his love for the Egyptians. I believe he loved both of them. Oh, yeah. I'm telling you, that Egyptian woman was his mother. She got him out of that Nile River. She heard that baby cry. God opened up her heart. He became her son. She named him. She loved him as much as if he had come from her womb. And he loved her as his mother. Without any doubt. Now, this is a hard one. The Egyptians were far better to Moses than the Hebrews were. He was a prince. They fell down and worshipped him. He was a billionaire. He had everything. But what did he get from his family from day one? Besides heartache and misery. When Moses chose the Hebrews over the Egyptians, only his faith in God can explain that. Why do you like the people in church more than you do the people in the world, where you came from? You know they like you better out there, don't you? When does the world ever hurt you? I mean, they'll roll the red carpet out to you all the time. It's high five every time you're around them. It's laughing and fun and good times. That's what the world is. And they're not phony and they're not playing games. They're dead serious. They feel. And then you walk in the doors of the house of God and many times can't get to the pew without someone breaking your heart in God's house. And well, I'll tell you, there's something contradictive there. There's something messed up there. What's wrong with that picture? I mean, you can go down to the dives at 10 o'clock and walk in, and everybody you know there will greet you. And how do you know that, Pastor? Well, it seemed to me like it was like that 50 years ago. If there's a dive in this area, I don't even know where it is. But back when I was in the world, when I was a young man, the world loved me. I can't count the daggers that's been shoved in my heart from God's people. God's people. I mean, he had a real decision. Should I go with these people over here that ultimately they're going to make God turn against me? And that's exactly what they did, folks. He smote that rock because of those Jewish people. They were the one inflamed his passion until he disobeyed God. That's what I have fought my whole time, not to become a bully. And you know, I'm not a bully. Pastor's got a lot of power. A pastor can stand up here and say, I'm calling you up right now. I'm calling your hand on this. I'm calling you people. What do y'all want to do? You want to do it God's way or you want to do it the carnal way? Which way do you want to do it? Make up your mind. I want to know right now. Pastor has the power to do that. I would rather die than use pastoral power. I could never stand to humiliate someone. I was in a church where a church called a man up and kicked him out of church and kicked his wife out of church and kicked his children out of church and kicked his mother out of church. That's just too much power, as far as I'm concerned, for a church to have. Folks, we learn that our faith leads us contrary to what's appealing to our flesh. We're here because out there leads to hell. You say, well, Pastor, is it really fun out there? Well, see what Moses did. He chose to suffer the persecution of Christ rather than to enjoy sin for a season. It's fun out there in the world. Don't think it's not fun. You can do a lot of things out there. There's a lot of stuff, even in a dead area like we live. There's still a lot of stupid things you can do and have a lot of fun out there. God often calls upon us to perform tasks which our natural man simply cannot possibly understand to do. Yes, it's hard to keep turning the other cheek. It's hard to keep doing it God's way. But you're going to love yourself in eternity when God looks at you and says, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've done it my way. When I was in school, I had a grand professor that taught me this. I want to teach it to you again. Many of you know the story already. He said, a day will come in your life when you will understand that it's God's children that's your real family. Even though sometimes they're mean to you. If they're God's children, they're your real family. He said, you'll probably have to spend a whole lifetime learning that. Folks, I don't know why we're mean to one another. I wish I could just wave my hand over you and you would never have another frown on your face, never have another bad feeling towards anyone. You'd always, every time you come into the house of God, you would have a smile on your face and walk up and hug and handshake. I love the photos this last Sunday morning when y'all were walking by and congratulating the dedication of the baby here. I've got those. They're indelible in my mind already, but I have the photographs already. They're precious. That's the way it'll always be. Eddie Geske thought you were smiling at her grandchildren. It meant a lot to her. She said saw Eddie. You don't mind me saying that. She said, I saw Eddie smiling at my grandchildren. It touched my heart. That's what this is all about. Love and tenderness. Folks, put your sword up at home and don't bring it to church. And don't hurt your family. Don't hurt your in-laws. Why does God let us go through trials? You think He doesn't know how we're going to handle them? Well, God's God. God knows everything. You know why He lets us go through trials? To see how much progress you've made. How much progress have you made? How are you handling your trials? Folks, they're going to continue until you start handling them. You've got to give in to God. When we pass a trial, every once in a while we do, you know what happens then, Brother Nuke, if you're not real careful? You get real proud. What does God hate? God hates a proud look. Oh man, look at me. I really excelled on this one. Well, you'd have been better off to have failed it if it's going to be like that. You ever get to the point in your Christian experience where you wonder if God can do without you? I know before I was on the railroad, I worked in a job, and I left it, and I told my wife, I said, I got that job down so good, they'll never be able to replace me. How many of you felt that? When I leave, this company's going out of business. Railroad go out of business when you left, Jake? They're still running cars. I use the telephone today, Brother Nick. It's still functioning. And they were running that little print shop down where I worked until they closed it. There are no exceptions. You entered a difficult path when you got into Christianity. You might as well face it. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough till you die. Older you get, tougher it's going to be. Never be easy. But guess what you have? You always have God on your side. Parakletos. Two Greek words. Para, alongside of. Kaleo is the verb. Parakletos. The Holy Spirit is called alongside of you. He walks with you every day. What happened today that you'd have been a lot better off if you would have bowed your head and talked to the Spirit of God who's walking right alongside of you? There's when you become a mature Christian. Spirit of God, you can talk to Him. God doesn't mind that. Spirit of God, my heart's just gotten bruised. Give me help. Get me through this. I don't like to go from spiritual to physical. But I really believe the Spirit of God every once in a while will pamper you when you really need it. Will ask for help. He is your comforter. That's another one of His names. I don't know why it is the Baptist church. We want a dual God. We've kicked the third person in the Godhead out because of the Pentecostals, what they've done. We don't have to act like fools. But we can thank God that the Spirit of God's with us. Folks, thank you for your good attention. I hope something has been helpful to you this evening. Are you going through a trial? Would you give it to God right now? Walk out of this church tonight. Leave your trial in God's hands. Get a smile on your face. walk out of this church.